Well, hey, everybody, welcome.
Welcome to Solutions from the Multiverse, everyone.
We're in a new studio. I don't know if you can hear it.
Undisclosed.
Undisclosed, but
Camp David. We're in Camp David.
we're set up
podcasting.
We can't be stopped by a location change. They can't contain these ideas. You think you can stop these ideas by moving our location? It's not going to happen.
No, these ideas are stopped before they start. They
I think we call those non-starters.
They're non-starters.
We got a bunch of non-starters here.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, stay tuned for some non-starters.
Yeah, it's interesting actually how, you come up with new ideas all the time, and then, they're not. There's no opposition. It's just obscurity. Obscurity is the only reason. At least some of these ideas.
I mean, some of your
aren't
ideas
taken
could
up.
have, if you're not trying hard enough, if you're not getting too much opposition, you got to.
Well, there is no opposition because they're new. That's the weird thing about new ideas, right? Old ideas have opposition
They've
because people
established-
know that they don't like that idea, right? Like socialism. People, right wingers, don't like socialism. So they're right. But if you were like, if no one knew what socialism was, and you were like, what if we just had like libraries and everyone could just take books out of the library, but we did the same thing, but like for healthcare and for education and for other things, people would be like, well,
That sounds
like no
all
one would
right.
even know about it. Like you would be one guy just shouting about it, or talking about it
Right.
in your living room, and no one would know about that. So there would be no opposition. People would just look at you like, oh, that's weird, and then they would go about their day. So like the stiffest opposition you can have is obscurity.
Yeah, it seems like labels sometimes work in your advantage because it'll help you kind of like coalesce all these ideas and power under the same like banner, but then it can work against you too because people can just be like, I am against socialism, for instance, and you're like, oh, how do you like the fire department? And they're like, I love the fire department. You're like, I got news for you.
How do you think about library
Got
books?
news for you, dude.
How do you feel about?
They're just like they are like, I'm against the word socialism, not necessarily digging too deep on what is involved and what I
and
like.
the same thing, just because we're fair and balanced on this podcast.
Oh,
same
beautiful! That's a great motto. We should adopt that. I wonder if that's being used anywhere.
I don't think so. I think I just came up with it. So I brought a solution today.
Excellent. That's your job. That's your job.
I know. It's hard work. I got to keep doing it.
Pat you on the back. Here you go. Good job.
Okay. Here's the solution. This is it's a bit philosophical, but it's relatively new, totally out of the mainstream.
Okay.
And I can verify that because I have some stories around it. Okay. Have you ever heard of like utilitarianism?
Yes, but I am embarrassingly not able to define it right away in a really clean way.
It's okay. So utilitarianism, it was invented by this guy, Jeremy Bentham.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy.
In the 1700s. And
okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Late, Jeremy.
Yep. He's very late. Jeez, he was supposed to be here and he's not here.
Jeez, Jeremy.
Yeah, God, so late. And then it was kind of improved by John Stuart Mill. Although I'm learning more and more that it was kind of maybe his wife was actually the power behind the throne. Like
Wait, what was the guy's name?
John Stuart Mill.
No, the other guy.
Jeremy Bentham. He like revolutionized a lot of stuff. He's like a social reformer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then he passed the baton to John Stuart Mill.
So then John Stuart Mill basically added human rights to utilitarianism. So utilitarianism, Bentham said that we need to promote the greatest good for the greatest number. So basically we should just maximize pleasure and happiness, and we should minimize pain and suffering.
Okay.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
All right.
But he lived in a time when it was like kind of like Christianity, like we should just try to be as holy as possible. That was like the idea. And then for anything that wasn't bound by religion, it was just like you should just follow the traditions of the day. Like whatever the traditions were, you should do that. That was the times he lived in.
So you're saying like when he's like you should pursue unbridled pleasure, what he's talking about is like eating 4 berries at once.
No, I mean I think there is a kind of lasciviousness to it. I think his critics at the time would have said that, like, oh, you're promoting, sinful, because his critics were probably traditionalists and Christians.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, you're promoting like, orgies or something, satanic orgies. I mean, that's the thing. I think his critics would be like, of the time. He has critics at the time, and then he has critics now. It's going to be very different. But yeah, at the time, it would have been like, what? You can't behave like that. That's not proper. It's not cricket. You have to, do the right thing. And he would have been like, no, we just need to like, do these practical things that make people's lives better. So we should like he invented a lot of the social welfare or first social welfare systems to like ever exist, like feeding poor people just because that will minimize their misery and maximize their happiness. So we should do it.
That must have been a trip, like trying to get people to switch from the mindset of me to the mindset of like us. Like instead of like, so everyone's like, I'm taking care of myself. And they're like, no, what if we took care of ourselves? And they're like, oh, what are you talking about, dude? Is it straight? Like, I am taking care of me. You are taking care of you.
Wait, he ate 4 berries, guys. He's got.
Get him. Attack Jeremy.
Get him. Yeah. So he basically said that, and then
Stuart Mill comes in and he goes, "Here's the missing piece."
John Stuart Mill. Yeah, because the problem. So, anyways, let me get into the idea though. So now, utilitarian. No, it's okay. We'll come back to this because it is kind of important for the background. But basically, he said, let's have the greatest good for the greatest number. So the idea for today is another idea, which is that's not actually that right. The utilitarian thing's not actually right, and we'll get into why. But what is maybe right and maybe should be the ethic that we actually promote with ourselves personally, but also in our society is not to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number, but to minimize the most amount of avoidable misery for the greatest number. Mm-hmm. And that should be actually the basis of choosing between right and wrong, choosing the right policy, the right law, government of corporations, institutions, but also our own personal behavior. We should try to strive to reduce misery, the avoidable misery, as much as possible. That's the idea.
We've talked about this is kind of a theme. We've talked about this before on an episode where you wanted to define our nation's health by gross domestic misery instead of gross domestic product. Yeah. It's kind of a theme where you're like, look, if we don't, instead of boosting the ceiling of a few, why don't we lift the floor on everyone else?
Yeah, or even the ceiling of many. I mean, the utilitarianism would say, it is kind of a mass society thing. Let's make everyone as happy as possible, and there's something, people like that. But I think when you get down into the weeds of examples and really like kind of compare and contrast these using hypotheticals and historical examples, you find that if you try to maximize happiness, even if that includes eliminating misery, but you have kind of eliminating misery and increasing happiness on the same scale, then you still end up with really objectionable outcomes morally. But if you focus only on eliminating misery for your ethical choices, and then maximizing happiness comes kind of after you're done, like the decision to chew bubblegum or not is not an ethical decision, right? So right. You kind of, you have these sort of ethical decisions, and you use how much misery is going to be created in order to decide. And then you have kind of non-ethical decisions, and in those decisions, you try to make yourself happy. You try to make other people happy around you. So it's kind of a two-phase ethic where you have this kind of initial phase and this sort of secondary phase. But yeah, we can get into some examples and that maybe make it more clear. But that's the idea. That's the solution. This is, yeah.
What is the last utilitarian thing that you think you've done that you can remember? I'm trying to think as well for me.
Well, I mean, I think what we do with this podcast is very utilitarian.
Oh, that's
it's also very. I mean, I call this idea misericordian.
Wait, you're not doing this for the massive money that we get paid?
I mean, definitely that helps, but that maximizes my utility, so that's pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't disqualify us.
No. But yeah, so Jeremy Bentham basically said greatest good for greatest number.
Okay.
But then here's the problem with that. Okay. You're a doctor and you have 5 patients.
I'm a doctor.
Imagine you're a doctor.
Oh,
you're not actually a doctor.
I thought maybe I got promoted just now.
No. Imagine you're a doctor.
Okay.
And you have 5 patients and they're all going to die. One needs a heart, one needs a set of lungs, one needs a pancreas, one needs a kidney, and the other guy needs another kidney, whatever.
Okay.
And then you're like, wow, these patients are all going to die. But then you remember that in the next exam room over, there's a healthy young man in there who came in for a checkup.
Oh no.
And he's taking a nap, in the other room waiting for the doctor to come in, and you could just go in there and, give him a little shot and harvest all his organs and save 5 people's lives.
Okay. And that would be under strict utilitarianism. You're acting in a good way.
Right.
You're doing the best for the best number of people.
5 people live. And
so let's not mind the murder that happened. We saved 5 lives, and that's the important thing.
Okay. Right.
Interesting.
So that's problematic.
And that's Jeremy Bentham's version.
Well, Jeremy Bentham himself would have never said.
Jeremy Bentham himself was a murdering doctor.
No, yeah, he just loved it.
He killed healthy people, and this was his hit.
He was an organ harvester. Yeah.
He was like, no, let me explain what I'm thinking here. This is why it's right. And everyone's like, okay,
every time I hang out with Bentham, I wake up the next morning in a bucket of ice with my kidney going, Bentham got me again.
If you hang out with him and you're deathly ill, you're going to be great. If you hang out with him and you're totally healthy, you are in trouble. Big problems.
Watch out. Hang on to your sides because he's coming for you.
Yeah, actually, like pretend like you have some sort of an ailment or something.
We have to be careful, or people listening to this podcast will think Jeremy Bentham was some kind of Jack the Ripper character.
The only way you could survive around Bentham is be like, oh, I have the vapors and my organs are riddled with cooties. And he'll be like, oh, not that guy. A mental note. Don't kill this guy.
Cooties. I guess it was like 1700, so cooties was probably it's like the scariest medical thing you could come up with, right? Yeah. But basically, yeah, so people noticed that. They were like, well...
There's a flaw in your...
Yeah, well, if you apply it... The problem is if you apply it extremely analytically and logically, then it's like that. Jeremy Bentham himself was like a total... he was kind of a grand vivant guy. He was like... for him, it just meant like, let's make life really good. Like, it was kind of like this banner, an anthem. That kind of had an ethos behind it. But then, little bean counter box checker people like logicians came after and were reading his stuff. And then they were like, but if you apply it super logically, then, but Bentham himself would never have said, oh yeah, what I'm saying promotes involuntary organ transplant. He'd say, you are crazy. And then he would move on from you because he has many more important things to do than like fight about the logic of
someone coming up with a gotcha.
Yeah, he would like fly around the world, or not fly because he couldn't fly, but he would take ships and go around the world like building the laws of new countries. Like Jeremy Bentham was like a very serious reformer and guy. Like he wasn't sitting around like, fighting with people. He'd just look at you like you're an idiot if you said, oh, this leads to involuntary organ transplant. But when he died, and then what continued on was this discourse of like, well, how do we make utilitarianism like actually work? So this guy, John Stuart Mill, another famous philosopher, he came along and was like, oh, if we just like railroad in like human rights into utilitarianism, we end up with like something that really works in a lot of cases. But the problem is utilitarianism and human rights are directly at odds with each other philosophically.
Okay.
It's like trying to get like it's like put two strange bedfellows, right? Because human rights say no matter what, you have these unalienable things that you can't do to people, and people have to be allowed to be able to do. But then on the utilitarian side, you're saying
anything's fair game,
right?
For the better of everybody.
To go for it. And so how can you put those together? John Stuart Mill literally just like uses crazy glue. He's just like, no, we're just going to zipper. Like, when you can't fit everything in your luggage and you're like, get the zipper. And the zipper's like, the teeth of the zipper are like,
try. You're like, this is not going to make it to wherever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but he did it. He just was like.
So how does he do that? How do you get those two conflicting ideas?
He just says
to play
it.
Nice
He
to
just
each other?
says, he says, right, I know the exact quote where he says it. He says, there is a very, essentially, he says, there's a very special and superb utility in the recognition of rights. And it's so special and so superb that it wins in every kind of utility calculation, which is crazy. It's not, that's crazy. It's not right. He just forces it.
So we take John Stuart Mill back to our operating room, and the doctor who's like, all right, I'm going to kill this guy to save these 5 people. He's like, no, you can't, because the human rights of that guy
are so so magical unicorn utility.
That's a wall that stops you from doing your utilitarianism, but it doesn't conflict with it or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
And this continues to be, and everyone, this is not controversial to say that everyone, people will quibble about it, but it's not controversial to say that utilitarianism together with human rights is basically the ethic of the last 100 years. It's become the standard ethic of businesses, corporations, governments, individual people. Like that's our ethic. That's the world we live in.
Okay.
If we were in the Middle Ages and I said, we're all part of the body of Christ and whatever the priest says goes, and if the king comes by, be careful because he'll cut off your head. That was the ethic of the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
Now the ethic is do everything you can to make the world as good as possible. Happiness and pleasure, reduce pain and suffering, but follow the rules of the road. Don't break people's human rights.
Here's some
That's it.
ungoable spots.
Yeah. So and you can think of examples. If a corporation tries to maximize profit, we're like, yeah, it's a corporation tries to maximize profit. That's fine, maximizing utility. But that corporation poisoned the water. Oh, unacceptable. They broke those people's human rights. They have a right to clean water. So we always are doing this all day long. You hear it on the news. You hear people talking about it all day long. This is the ethic we live in.
Right.
Problem is, it's wrong, or it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It leads to bad outcomes.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not like we've used it the past 100 years to craft a utopia for everybody that no one has a problem with.
Look around you.
No one.
Look at that man being removed by the police in front of my door.
Has anyone a complaint about the modern day? No, zero.
Everything's fine and great. Perfect. Then why are we doing this podcast? We should call this Lalas from the Ligi Laga Laga.
Well, I think in a perfect world, everybody gets their own podcast, and this is ours.
That's true. It is part of a perfect world. It's the best of all possible worlds, right? But
is it? I hope not.
But though the idea is maybe the world's not very as good as it could. I mean, it's better than I think. The king's going to come cut off your head. I mean, it's maybe better than that.
Better than that.
Yeah, but it maybe could be better if our fundamental operating system ethically was actually based on a more true and a better working ethical philosophy, which I would argue is to say, instead of trying to reduce misery and increase happiness, you just say we need to eliminate as much avoidable misery as we can, and then we can pursue happiness. So it's sort of like eat your peas before your dessert, like eat your vegetables before you get cake, rather than get as much cake as you can and eat as few vegetables as you can, kind of.
So Jeremy Bentham is like, all right, good, as much good for everybody as we can. And then John Stuart Mill is like, hold on, what about people, like, we got to have some limits on this.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, now let's erase the Jeremy Bentham part. Let's keep the John Stuart Mill part and be like, just have these limits that...
Well, no, because the John Stuart Mill part is actually... What happens is if you say, let's reduce avoidable misery as much as possible, human rights emerge out of that organically. Because if you say like, well, everyone has a right to life, like you can't just deprive people of their life. You could say what people in the past have said, which is God has granted his creations with a super magical thing called a right, that they can have their life no matter what. And God said that. That's what human rights came out of, was a belief in God. The problem is we have lost our belief in God as a society largely. Okay. The idea of human rights came from Thomas Aquinas. So Aquinas came up with the idea essentially of rights from God. And then the Enlightenment philosophers all read Aquinas and were like, that's a good idea.
Sounds good. Let's go.
And they kind of just sort of ushered it in under a kind of deism, not like Christian, Catholic necessarily, but just sort of a deistic sort of belief in a creator. But then we lost that. Nietzsche says God is dead. Well, that's a problem if we lose God, because not because God is somehow important as a concept in and of itself. Maybe it is for some people. But my point is, philosophically and institutionally, it's a problem because our institutions are based on human rights derived from God. So how do you get human rights without God?
Well, wasn't Nietzsche's like, well, we got these human rights from the God, but we built the God, so it's kind of all of our. Built all of it.
But then it's like, well, then someone who's strong and powerful can just deprive people of human rights and be like, well, now I'm making a new world that has different.
That's happened a bunch.
I know, and it's not good. It's not good.
It's not good.
So the benefit of misericordianism, this idea of the greatest good, rather than the greatest good, eliminating the most avoidable misery, is that rights then derive from that principle. So if you say we have a right to life, what that really means is, as a rule of thumb, if you deprive people of life, you will be screwing up because you'll be creating a ton of misery that maybe you don't notice when you're killing somebody. Because their family's going to have misery and their community's going to have misery, and they're going to have misery as they die. They're going to have pain and suffering. You're going to feel pain and suffering and guilt, and you're going to be racked with feelings of, So the idea is, hey, heads up, rule of thumb, don't murder. Like, don't deprive people of their right to life. So the idea of rights changes from, you've been given it from God, to, hey, we've built up a bunch of rules of thumb that are really smart to follow if you want to avoid misery as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's nice. So you get human rights, but they're derived from the core ethical principle instead of being sort of tacky, like crazy glued on.
So are you wondering how can we reemerge human rights from a different origin spot, or is that?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, I think. Yeah, it strengthens human rights.
Okay.
But it only depends on then the strength of that core idea. Is it right? Is an action right because it leads to the least avoidable misery? And if that's what makes an action right, that's the important thing. Because now then everything's going to come from that, even human rights.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to like go and interrogate. Is that actually right? Is that a good? Okay, so here's the problem: the world exploder,
The world exploder.
the benevolent world exploder.
Benevolent world exploder. That sounds like an oxymoron.
BWE. Yeah, well, not if you. So here's the thing. So so
if you come
somebody
into
said,
a party with BWE.
"Oh, you got some serious BWE, man."
You see that guy over there? He's got benevolent world exploder.
He's got
energy. I guess it would be BWEE.
BWE energy. Yeah. Oof, that guy's got some BWE energy.
That guy. I don't like him. Too much BWE.
I don't like that guy. I don't know. I don't know what it is about him.
The oxymoron, benevolent world exploder. Please explain.
So this sound okay. So what I'm going to say sounds insane, but
what else is new?
It is. Damn it! But the problem is okay. So there's a story of this idea of reducing avoidable misery.
Okay.
As being the core ethic of the world. Like if you promote that idea, and that is this guy Karl Popper, this philosopher, World War II kind of era philosopher, anti-fascist guy, philosopher of science, but then he wrote this book about anti-fascism. And in that book, he wrote a footnote where he was like, why do we try to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number? Seems like we should try to minimize the most avoidable misery for the greatest number. And then he was like, huh. And that was a footnote.
Okay.
It was literally like
just a throwaway little thing.
Just a footnote. It had the long footnote, but it was like just a paragraph,
Yeah.
And that's it. He never wrote any more about it. It's weird. And actually kind of irresponsible that he didn't write anymore. So then like 5 years later, 7 years later, this guy whose name is R.N. Smart, super smart guy.
What?
Really smart. Yeah.
His name is
Smart.
Okay.
And he wrote an essay.
R.N. like the letters R.
Just R.N. Yeah. And then he wrote an essay called Negative Utilitarianism, where he named this idea negative utilitarianism, which I think is a misnomer. Like that actually shouldn't be the name, but that is the name of this idea. Mm-hmm. I think misericordianism.
You can argue with this guy. He's smart.
He's very smart, and you should meet his brother, JJC Smart, also a philosopher.
Is that a real thing?
Yes.
Okay, I thought you were going.
And they both wrote philosophies of utilitarianism.
These kind of sound like a couple of smart brothers.
Oh yeah, really smart. So R.N. Smart wrote this 400-word essay. Like not this
did
is
these
like
two people not? Did they just call each other JJC and RN? Like,
yeah, I don't know what their names are.
How are you?
Yeah,
thank you, RN. I am doing wonderfully.
I don't know what their names are. Registered nurse, Smart. I don't know.
I guess if your last name is Smart, you just kind of get.
Yeah, you want to focus on.
You're just
that.
like, look, guys, it doesn't matter what the first.
See, my
one is.
first name is Dumb, so I got.
Oh no!
Yeah, I got Dumb in there. They got Smart. It's not going good.
So whatever these people, if you disagree with them, I know to go with the Smart brothers.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So the Smart brothers came out swinging, and they were like, the idea of avoidable misery is stupid and wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you because if eliminating misery is the greatest ethic, then that means a benevolent world destroyer, like an alien technology that could destroy a whole planet painlessly, like instantly, then the best thing they could do is destroy all life on Earth. That would be the best thing because then it would eliminate all misery.
I mean, that's sort of the AI fear where it's like robots gain sentience and they're like, help fix the planet. And they're like, the problem is humans.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, step one is destroy humans. And you're like, no, that's not what I meant.
And that's what they're saying. They're saying this principle essentially sets us up for a kind of nihilistic destruction.
Well, he's right. He's like, technically, if nobody's alive, then no one's feeling misery, which is the least possible misery that can happen.
Exactly.
Is that your ideal situation?
Yeah, exactly. And then, okay, so he wrote this 400 words. Like I don't assign to my freshman college students less than 500-word essays. And he wrote a 400-word essay writing this up.
Yeah, but is he having to dip a feather into an ink?
No, this was like 1957 he wrote this, 1952.
He's having to crack a typewriter.
He didn't have a ballpoint pen. That's space age technology.
I mean, because if you have to dip animal parts into like soot and then write for a while. I'm going to give
true,
you
you gotta
fewer.
scratch it out.
Fewer words is okay. You can get it done.
That's true. No, he had a 1952. He had a typewriter. He could have written 10,000 words.
All right, so he's just lazy.
He's lazy. He writes this thing. Okay, now what makes no sense to me is that this idea that Aaron Smart wrote up has literally has killed the idea of eliminating misery. Totally eliminated it. If you talk to any philosopher, they'll first of all not know what negative utilitarianism is. And if they do know, the first words out of their mouth will be,
that's not
BWE.
true.
They will say, benevolent world destroyer, this is an idiotic idea.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they'll say, which is crazy because the guy wrote a 400-word essay. It's not bulletproof at all. Like you can destroy this argument like very easily. But for some reason, everyone's caught in like this giant mind trance that we believe that's a bulletproof argument. The other argument, which is essentially the same one, which is called the pinprick argument, which is if your only ethical demand is to eliminate misery, then you would sacrifice the happiness and the joy of a billion people to avoid a child getting a single pinprick on their finger and crying, because you value not at all happiness but you value entirely misery, right. And therefore that's absurd, and therefore the idea
there's a flaw in this.
There's a flaw, right?
Yeah.
So that's the principle. So how convinced are you by the benevolent world exploder and the pinprick arguments?
I mean, it does seem like if you're going to lay down a blanket statement like, minimize misery, then yeah, it does seem like it leaves you open for it. When you're describing it, it feels like the justification that gets used for like dropping the atomic bombs in World War II, where they're like, we're going to kill these people, these hundreds of thousands of definitely civilians and children and like old people and people who are not soldiers. And the justification is it's going to save us in the long run many more lives over the course of, years of conflict or whatever. Right. So it does feel like it gets justified in that way. And then people are like, so good thing? And I'm like, I can't get on board with you.
Yeah,
I
can't
don't know.
be a good, certainly not unequivocally good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's so horrifying. Yeah.
So it is weird, but it's also one of those, I'm an extremes guy. So if you say something, I want to try to break it by going and finding the edge cases or the corner cases and like the things that would almost never, ever happen. But I'm like, well, theoretically they could. So you have to account for this.
Yeah.
I'm that guy, which is obnoxious.
No, it's good. I think it's good.
So that's where I think when you say this, I'm like, yeah, of course there are problems, but it feels like it could work really well outside of ever hitting those edge cases.
Like an alien race that can destroy the whole planet.
Right. Yeah. Where you're like, well, we haven't factored that in. You're like, because I don't probably need to practically.
But what about the pinprick? The pinprick's quite practical, right? So you could say, hey, we could, the Olympics should be canceled because Olympians sprain their ankles.
Yeah.
And therefore we shouldn't have the Olympics.
I think
it's like, Jesus, or like we should anything that's dangerous should be illegal because, it could kill a few people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's an individual thing.
Cell phones in cars, right? They did this research that people using cell phones in cars kills 2,000 people a year. Should we just illegalize ever having your cell phone out in a car?
Right.
But then actually having cell phones in cars benefits a lot of people too, because they get to have all these benefits, and it's the whole society. It's not just 2,000 people. It's 300 million people or whatever, 100 million people who are driving with their phones aren't having a benefit from using their phones while they drive. So is it the happiness of using your phone when you drive is that off? Does that offset the 2,000 or?
I don't know. And they, and some people have an issue where they are like, if pizza is going to be totally fine, some people are going to get into a problem by eating pizza way too much all the time. And I'm like, don't
project your own problems into the world.
It's some unnamed person who eats pizza all the time. No, but like if we err toward that person's like inability to control, then everybody doesn't get to eat pizza or whatever. That's
right.
I feel like individually you can look at it because there are some cases where that seems absurd, but I'm one of the weirdos who's like looking at the NFL going like, I don't know, man. It feels like
that's a great
lot
example.
of brain stuff
the
that
NFL
happens
is a great example
for a lot of men and kids and the whole culture of smashing heads into each other when you're like 6 years old on up.
Right.
And I'm like, maybe that's not worth the game.
But a lot of people would say the, the 100 million people or the 300 million people that tune into the Super Bowl, they're enjoying an entire family experience and
Yeah.
community and friendship, and they get to all come together. Maybe they even have political differences, but they come together and they love football. And therefore, a few thousand players getting like brain damage and depression and stuff later in life and mood swings and stuff is quote unquote worth it. And therefore, so this pinprick argument is not just totally.
It's cost benefit because, even going to doing a push-up, doing a push-up itself, you're like, this is it's a low degree of misery or whatever, but I'm doing it for the later benefit of having stronger muscles, being, a person who can do push-ups and not get tired, those types of things. If you're going like a very cold look at reducing misery all the time and not expanding out, then you're like, I should never exercise. I should never eat vegetable. I should never do any, I should
cake, no
and
peas.
You're like, this will be my healthy life, which is just me being hedonic and experiencing pleasure all the time and no pain.
Exactly. So this is exactly what people say. A lot of people are convinced by these two arguments. They're convinced by the pinprick
and the
BWE energy.
Okay.
Yeah. And and this is not just like there's controversy. Philosophers have controversy. I am not lying when I tell you that 99.9999% of philosophers are convinced by these arguments.
Okay.
Which I find insane, because where do you find that level of consensus? Like, I can't think of another thing where like everyone believes. Like, you'll meet people who are like, they believe all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah.
But you cannot find someone who, there are a few weirdos who do believe in this stuff.
Sure.
Some of them are in the effective altruism community. And yeah, they are weirdos. They're cool too. I'm like connected with them. We believe the same things. I'm a weirdo. I'm not trying to like call them out. I actually think they're great to believe this, but they're in the
atypical beliefs.
Yeah, in the grander scheme, they're weirdos. And I know this partly because I'm applying to PhD programs to research this philosophical idea, and I'm being not just rejected, but being told we don't really believe this idea, and therefore you can't research it at our university.
They're like, we already know the end result of your research.
They're like,
so
you're
don't
wrong.
bother doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, but I'm thinking that maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the footnote is only like a few hundred words, and the refutation was only 400 words. And then there hasn't really been much more written about it after that.
It feels like 300 years. Maybe you could go a little bit more than 800 words.
Well, it was 100 years ago. But yeah, still. It was like 80 years ago. But still, because it was written in 1935.
I keep getting my time time shift is very bad. Like,
Jeremy Bentham was 300, but this idea came up in like World War II time, and then it was written about in the 50s a little bit, and then recently it's only been rejected, but the rejections are just reiterations of those same pinprick and BWE arguments.
I am hoping that they cover this. I'm a movie guy, and I'm excited about the new Chris Nolan movie Oppenheimer coming out.
Yes,
Robert J. Oppenheimer, who's created the atomic bomb back in this time period we're talking about. And I'm hoping that they get into those prickly philosophical, discussions, because I know that was a big thing in the room where they're like, it was literally a room full of people building the thing that didn't exist yet. That would be the world ender, essentially, and trying to discuss philosophy while they're building it, while they're deciding if they should or not, if they can even, So I hope that's a part of that. It seems related, but that's
when Oppenheimer first saw the bomb in Trinity, the Trinity site in New Mexico, when they first saw the bomb go off, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita, and he said, he quoted this.
I have become Shiva, destroyer of worlds, I believe.
I think it's not Shiva, because it was Krishna, but it was Krishna reveals his true self to Arjuna, and it says it's like 1,000 suns exploding at once, which they didn't have a concept of supernova. So the idea of the sun exploding was like beyond any ken. And then to say 1,000 suns exploding. Yeah. It was like unbelievable, like beyond energy and power. And that's what he said. But if you look at the Bhagavad Gita,
era where they knew so little about it that they were like, all right, we're going to blow up that nuclear bomb and we're going to be over here like 5 football fields away. And we're looking through like a slit in a thing. So we're good.
Yeah. It's like,
if you look at it today and you're like, guys, you are way too close. You're way, way, way too close. Don't be doing this.
He needs some shielding. But if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, I mean, the Bhagavad Gita basically, I mean, I'm not surprised he quoted that because the Bhagavad Gita is the god of wisdom telling Arjuna to fight and to kill in a civil war against his own family members and like people he knows, like a city essentially divided in two. And Arjuna's like, no, I can't fight. And Krishna's like, no, you need to like fight and kill because that's your duty to like restore order. So I think if you look at the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see that maybe they'll draw that out in the movie that Oppenheimer was reading the Bhagavad Gita and saying, yeah, we need to build the atomic bomb because we need to like restore order. We need to like prevent, further bloodshed.
It feels like that may have even been a healthier era of discussion about this type of world ending thing where because it was so new and it was such this could kaboom everyone at once that everyone kind of had to play good. But I feel like now it's become a thing where people have this fantasy where they're like, no, I'm going to get control of like the nukes. And then I'm going to hide underneath with my group of people and kill everyone else. And then I will start the world over with like my ethos. From,
sort of like we could not have a mine shaft gap.
Yeah, well, instead of
you know what I'm talking
about from Dr. Strangelove. But like instead of like everyone being responsible to be like, no, this will end everybody. Some people are like, no, I can be aggressive because this will end everyone except me. Right. And then the
real risk now. I mean, you're talking like very Cold War times, but the real risk now is no. We can use a tactical nuclear weapon. We can make a single nuke that's the size of a briefcase that blows up like one oil tanker, but it like completely evaporates an oil tanker. So we can do that. And it's like, that's the scary thing. Cause you're crossing treaties that say, if you use a nuclear weapon, it's all out.
Right.
Like we're all mass annihilation, but they just use a nuclear weapon that's the size of a briefcase. So we start to get into these places where it's like, ooh, bad. I mean, obviously it's bad, but I mean, it's because miniaturization of technology creates these really dangerous possibilities.
Ant-Man's out there. He's got real miniaturization of technology.
You know that those movies are fake, right? You know those movies are fake, right?
What?
Scott, those are not news reports.
No, but the big purple guy who came and like made half of the people.
Oh yeah, he's real.
Okay.
Yeah. But the really small one, not real. That was done with CGI.
I was going to say,
the big guy is
when my
real.
dad vanished and he said like he was gone for 5 years and he said that he had been snapped by the big purple guy, that I shouldn't question that, right?
No, that's true.
That was true. He didn't just leave.
No, but he didn't miniaturize and like live inside your bloodstream for
that's
5 years.
That's absurd. That's ridiculous.
No, you want to do that. So anyways, pinprick and the BDE. So BWE. So my solution to those arguments, which are called ad absurdum arguments, right? Because they take the initial premise and then they reason to.
I actually call
conclusion.
all your arguments ad absurdum arguments. Ad absurdum.
Another terrible association with my name. Making ad absurdum arguments.
Just put absurd right in the middle of Adam.
God damn
and we've got it.
But those are both ad absurdum arguments, which is supposed to disprove your first premise. So you take the first premise, you reason to an absurd conclusion, and then you go say, well, if it leads to that absurd conclusion, then the first premise must be wrong. The problem with the ad absurdum is that they're taking the wrong first premise. So their first premise is you should eliminate all misery unequivocally. Mm-hmm. But actually, the first premise of what I call misericordianism or what is called negative utilitarianism, the first premise is actually you should eliminate all avoidable misery.
Important
this
word.
Key word is like all the enemies of this idea just ignore that word, and when you bring it up, all they do is just tell you to shut up. They're like, no, la 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 la. They just put like fingers in their ears, la 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 la.
These sound like intellectuals. Yeah,
these are intellectuals.
Okay.
But if you look even at Popper, he wrote it. He says it's right there: avoidable misery. Not all misery. Oh, get rid of all misery. Then pinpricks and we should just murder everyone, right? Because that's all misery, unequivocally, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But if you start to talk about what avoidable miseries are, then things change. It's all those ad absurd arguments just immediately fall off, and you're left with something that actually is quite interesting and quite potent.
So what's an example? I mean, I'm sure there's a million, but what's an example of unavoidable misery that we could use as a concrete?
Okay, I'll give you an example. Teen pregnancy, teen heartbreak. Okay, so teen heartbreak is miserable. Teenagers fall in love and then they fall out of love, and boy, it's hard for them, right? Because it's, first cut is the deepest.
I was going to say, I wasn't a very popular teen. I didn't do a lot of dating, and so I was able to avoid misery and
You totally did.
pregnancy pretty easily,
Right,
actually.
yeah. Man, I was praying for some teen heartbreak back then. Maybe some, not teen pregnancy. But
Anybody want to come break my heart later? And they're
someone
like,
do
no,
that?
we're good. I'm like, okay, cool.
cool. You don't want to go to the dance. That's cool. So one of those is avoidable and one of them is not, right? So if you think, how do you get rid of teen pregnancy?
Mhm.
It's like, well, first let me define avoidable. So avoidable means that it takes less misery to eliminate something than to tolerate it.
Less misery to eliminate it than to tolerate it. Okay.
Yeah.
I think
So
I'm
if it
locked
takes
in.
less misery to eliminate it, then the thing,
Mhm.
like it's basically if the juice is worth the squeeze, you do it. But if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then it's unavoidable. And now you don't have an obligation to eliminate it because it's unavoidable misery. It's a necessary misery. I don't like the word necessary, but that's an synonym to it. Unnecessary.
All right, let me
misery.
do. I'm terrible with analogies. Let me try one. If I drop an egg on my floor and it breaks, I don't like cleaning up the egg is not fun. That's misery to a small degree. But
Yeah.
if I leave it there and it rots and it starts smelling
Way
and it's
worse.
gross, that's worse. So
Exactly.
cleaning up the egg is me not engaging in misery. It's me avoiding misery.
Correct.
Okay. That's a
Yeah.
bad example, but that helps me.
No, that's
that helps
exactly
me
right.
think of it.
Picking up and cleaning up an egg is like a pinprick, right? But it's worth the squeeze because letting the egg sit there is a far worse misery. It's going to
Eventually gonna be a
stink and ruin the
problem,
floor and
Bring animals in.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's really good. Yeah, an ounce of prevention versus a pound of cure, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, but I like teen heartbreak and teen pregnancy because teen heartbreak. How could you avoid teen heartbreak? I mean, you'd have to like isolate the sexes from each other,
Right.
and you'd have to you'd have to identify who was gay and also isolate them.
You'd
from
end
their
up creating
sex,
a different type of thing that's way worse. than
Yeah, and the
thing
teen,
you're avoiding.
you'd have
probably.
to lie to the teenagers and tell them that the other gender was bad and scary, had cooties, and you should stay away from them. Or you'd have to lie to them. You'd have to say all these things and do all these things that would, at the end of the day, be way worse than just like a few teenagers getting their heart broken and crying and saying, "Oh, it was so sad," or whatever.
Yeah.
So not to lessen heartbreak, it's horrible, right? But to say it's an unavoidable misery because to eliminate it,
You would have to like really.
And conversely, if you said, well, anytime anyone has teen heartbreak, we have this pill and they give it to them and then it just zones out their emotions for the next 2 weeks while they're, you would also say that's a pretty miserable world, right? It's a world without the poignancy of the loss of love, which then leads to greater loves in the future and more carefulness and more deliberation and more, understanding of people and the human heart. So even the ability to like medicate teen heartbreak away is miserable. It's more miserable than just allowing people to feel the misery of heartbreak.
Mhm.
So that's an example of an unavoidable misery. Teen pregnancy, on the other hand, all you need is universal contraception access and universal sex ed. Teen pregnancy goes down very precipitously, down to almost zero. And then when it is near zero, some teachers or some teenagers maybe want to have kids early, and that's their choice, and that's fine, right? And so, or if there's some accident, it's horrible. Well, statistically, that's going to happen. So the question is, that's again becomes an unavoidable misery because how do you get down to zero? Well, getting all the way to zero is going to cause such draconian measures that would be worse than just allowing a few to happen because you can't get it all the way down to zero, for example.
Yeah.
So that's kind of avoidable and unavoidable. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good explanation. That helps me understand it better, the difference between the two. And so he's saying we're avoiding as much avoidable misery.
Yeah,
as we can.
eliminating.
It's hard to say it.
We're eliminating.
before I say the wrong
Eliminating.
word.
Yeah.
Eliminating as
Yeah.
much avoidable misery.
Yeah.
And not worrying about.
Yeah.
the
Or you could
things
say,
that we can't
unnecessary misery. You could say if it's unnecessary, we're going to get rid of it. But if it is necessary, like we can't really avoid it without causing more misery, then we're going to tolerate it. We're going to have a stiff upper lip. We're going to endure it with grace, hopefully.
That is a thing that humans seem to be like, we jump to a solution without zooming out to go like, hold on, long term, does the solution create or enhance the problem in a different way that we're not like peaking in the short term? We're not super great at that, but then.
So yeah, that's the neat thing is if you put that little word avoidable in, then BWE is gone because a benevolent world destroyer is doing far more than eliminating avoidable misery, they're eliminating all misery.
Yes,
And
that gets classified
which is not ethical.
back from good into the bad category.
Yeah, or just unnecessary. I mean, sure, it'd be good to get rid of more misery if you could, but if you're that powerful of a being that you can like eliminate all life, then you should be using that power in a far more surgical way. I mean, that's what misericordianism would urge you to do. The ethical thing would be to identify all avoidable miseries and eliminate them, but not totalizing, maximizing to eliminate all misery. That's not that's not what it says, But literally all of philosophers, all academics will say, this is a stupid idea because of this ad absurdum argument, and their argument is wrong. They are missing the first premise, and therefore we've never explored this idea for 70 years that it's been around. It's been completely neglected, completely, and it's unbelievable that this has been neglected.
Well, that sounds like the ripe, fertile ground for someone who wanted to do a PhD on it.
It's not because it's not like I'm telling you. If
you
apply. They'll say no. They'll say, no, your idea is so stupid because I can instantly already refute it, they believe. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we reject. I've had multiple universities tell me, we reject your application to study this idea and research it more because BWE, because pinprick argument. And I just go like, I write back a long essay. Avoidable misery is not all misery. It's not totalizing. It's not maximizing. It's economical, And they just say that changes nothing. We would not accept you. It's so weird.
Have you tried promising that you're never going to become a benevolent world exploiter?
I do.
You're like, if you let me study this and I find out the path to blowing up the world, I promise I'm not gonna do it.
I promise to stop my research into a neutrino death ray that I'm not working on in my basement.
And they're like, well, then how would you have a name for it already? I name stuff.
I name stuff that doesn't exist yet. That's not in my basement. And it's almost working. I've killed 3 mice. Sorry. No.
See, I'm thinking I understand now these rejections.
Yeah, they don't want the benevolent world
It may not have been the thesis as much as all the extra side details you're throwing.
I wrote the application in my own blood. I don't understand why I'm being rejected. Scott, what is going on? It's so unfair. The world's so unfair to me.
Yeah. You're like, these are well-reasoned arguments made in my biological matter. What is the problem?
I've kidnapped multiple of the admission team's animals. They're in cages that I have. I will return them when I'm accepted. I do not understand why I'm not being accepted.
Yeah, you're like, Look, I'm trying to show them what avoidable, what misery in their lives is a bad thing.
I'm giving them some misery so they understand.
And I'm saying, how about we research avoiding misery? And I figured they would connect the dots, and they're not doing it. Now I'm in trouble with the police.
I can return Fluffy to them at any time and eliminate their misery. All they have to do. No, the point of this is not to air grievances.
Jeremy Bentham was a serial killer, and you are a weird person who writes your college entrance exams in blood. And I think I understand
stuff.
things.
Yeah. Ethical philosophers are weirdos, they have to be. I mean, my point is not to air grievances. My point, that's fine. You live in the times that you live in, and things are the way they are, and you try your best and whatever. But my point is to say, I've tried to talk to people who are supposed to be open-minded about research topics in philosophy, which would mean things that we don't know very much about and things that could use more attention. And I present this idea to them, and it's like just a wall. Crickets. Exactly, crickets. But crickets, in a way, obscurity is the greatest oppression, the greatest way to keep an idea. It's like the greatest opposition is obscurity.
Just not even talking.
Yeah,
about it.
Just total silence and immediate rejection with then silence, rather than an opposition having to form and actually fight against it. So
instead you're bringing it here, and we can share it with
we have an outlet. I need an outlet.
Because they're not going to let you study it, so we're gonna put it out here, and then someone's going to figure it out, and then
people are universally, anyone listening who knows anything about philosophy, they will immediately just say, no, that's wrong. You have not defeated the BWE.
Wait, you're making our listeners say that we're wrong as well?
They will. You
brought a toxic idea that's going to shut down our entire...
People will just think that we are just charlatan psychos to think that that the ethical content of action comes from how much avoidable misery it will lead to. That idea is totally anathema. And not only anathema, it's not anathema, because again, anathema suggests that there's an opposition. This idea just sounds
It just
like
doesn't exist.
it's
evaporates.
just crazy. It just sounds like crazy to people because we live in a time when it seems crazy. But if you really do the reasoning and the logic and you add that avoidable word back in, all the ad absurdum arguments fall apart. They just, like a house of cards, they just knock over. And now you're left with this really interesting idea that, by the way, has enormous explanatory power. Enormous. You can explain lots of people's behavior really, really easily as soon as you think about it this way.
Give me an example. What do you? I'm having a hard time.
Like for example, here's a kind of crazy example. So have you ever heard of like ethical dilemmas? Like the trolley problem.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right? You have 5 people on the track, 1 people on the track. Do you change the track? These things are supposed to make people feel like a conundrum, like a problem. But as soon as you understand that people are behaving in a way to avoid the greatest amount of or to eliminate the greatest amount of avoidable misery, they all just make sense. They all make perfect sense. And when people disagree, you can see clearly that they're simply arguing about it's unclear where the greatest misery is. And so there's necessarily a little bit of an argument, but it's not because they have different ethical beliefs. They all have the same ethical belief, which is to eliminate avoidable misery, but they just have different beliefs about the world. Well, if I turn and kill the one, I'll feel really bad and guilty. Oh,
right.
They see their own misery more.
The trolley. You're like, it's the misery greater of 5 people dying
that I
haven't impacted,
Right.
or I have actually caused the death of this one person.
Right.
Because of this.
Right. And so then there's this difference, but people would say, oh, then they're an egoist and the other person is a utilitarian. It's like, no, they're all misericordians. Misericordianism is the way human beings.
See, I jump in there and I'm like, is there a switch where like the trolley can split in 2 and kill both sets of people? Like, I want to know. I want to be responsible.
You've got that BWE right there. That's that BWE.
I'm like, are we out of trolleys here? Come on, because I got a lot of people tied to a lot of tracks. If we could run some trolleys through here, we can really get some damage done.
Would be that'd be like a Deadpool move, like a total Deadpool move, right? He walks to the back of the trolley, he unpegs the second trolley, and he has one trolley go one way and the other trolley go the other.
He's like, I got this, no problem.
Kill all of them. Kill 6 people.
I see the problem. You've got 2 tracks and not enough trains to kill all the people on the tracks. I can figure this out. I'll help you.
Exactly. So yeah, but the other thing it explains is ethical dilemmas themselves. Okay, so if you go down the line of ethical dilemmas, you've got, you're on a lifeboat. Who do you cannibalize? You've got like, you're a doctor and you only have enough medicine to cure one of the patients. Who do you cure? You go. They're all it's just this long. It's like each one is like a snuff film mixed with like a philosophy.
The worst case scenario. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and they're all that. Okay. Every one of them is supposed to be like a challenge to solve, or it's supposed to kind of put ethical philosophies in opposition. However,
it makes real humans feel.
Yeah, like, whoa.
Real feelings.
Yeah, like, whoa, this is weird. How should I go about this? But you know what's the interesting thing?
What?
The through line through every single ethical dilemma, avoidable misery. If you say, I have an ethical dilemma for you. There's 5 people eating a big banquet and there's enough food for all of them. Who gets to eat the first bite of strawberries? Like, you're like, I don't give a shit. It's not an ethical dilemma anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no avoidable misery.
There's no stake.
There's no avoidable misery. All of them are about avoidable misery and how you cope with avoidable misery. That's what they're all about. And that itself is evidence that avoidable misery is where we find the locus of ethical content in actions, is in avoidable misery, not in anything else. Certainly not in happiness and joy, which is kind of the refutation of utilitarianism. No one sits around with, I call it the lolly problem instead of the trolley problem.
Okay.
So there's the trolley problem is, who do you kill? Avoidable misery. Which misery do you avoid? Which misery is worse?
Right.
Okay, so it kind of boggles your brain. But no one says, well, you're walking by a park bench and there's a perfectly happy child sitting on the park bench, just enjoying the breeze, just totally happy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you give them a lollipop or not? No one says that, right? No one says that. But utilitarianism would say you must ethically, you have an absolute obligation to give them a lollipop because that would increase their utility, and it would even probably increase your utility because you'd feel good that you did something.
Sure.
But no one would ever say that. That would never be an ethical dilemma.
Right.
And it isn't an ethical dilemma because there's no avoidable misery there. Now, as soon as that child is drowning in a fountain in front of you, now that's the most classic ethical dilemma in the world. Do you rush in and ruin your clothes and ruin your day by
Definitely not.
by doing that. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, you don't because you have the BWE.
I have
but
really
other
nice
people,
clothing. It's very ruinous. Look, people don't know this about me. I dress in head to toe leather all the time, every day. And if I jumped into water, it would really complicate.
It's like a gimp
my
suit.
outfit
It's like a gimp suit.
Okay, all right.
You're like a vinyl kid or whatever. One of those.
It's a look. I'm trying to make it more mainstream. It's hard. It's not easy.
You fit in at the Folsom Street Fair. You really do. I'm looking at you right now.
It's hard to talk through this.
Wait, let me open your zipper.
Okay, thank you.
Zip. There we
It's
go.
very
Now the
difficult.
mouth is open.
Probably a bad choice for a podcasting outfit, but
Don't you sweat in that? You must just sweat.
well, now Adam, hold on. I have a question. Is part of it though, like, is part of what's being human that like you've got these decisions that are difficult decisions, but you're like, well, if you apply, you apply avoidable misery to the equation, it's real easy to pick. You just walk over to the trolley, you flip the switch, you kill the one person, you go, great, I've done a wonderful thing, and you walk away. But is there anything human to like the anguish of knowing that you've got two problems and neither one is a clean solution?
Yeah.
So you're just kind of like, I know I have to make the hard or bad, or I have to make the hard choice, but there's something human about not being able to just be like, yep, boop, and walk away and not have it affect me. Like it should affect me because I'm a human.
I'm not saying, sorry, I should be clear. I'm not saying that adding misericordianism and looking at these problems through that lens makes it an easy decision. It's still a problem because it is inherently problematic because it's unclear which action leads to the greater or lesser avoidable misery. So it's still a dilemma. The thing is that ethical philosophers use these dilemmas to say that there are different ethical philosophies that are of equal merit competing with each other. And that's what I'm saying. No, you can use one ethical philosophy to explain all the different outcomes that you could choose.
Gotcha.
So if you don't pull the lever and you ask someone, why wouldn't you pull the lever? And they say, well, I would feel horrible because I would have felt like I took agency and killed someone.
Right.
And therefore I would be racked with
I
guilt
took an
and
action
pain.
that caused someone's death.
What are they saying? They're saying from their perspective, in their judgment, at that moment, the greater avoidable misery is their own guilt and pain.
Feeling clean on their conscience. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And therefore, they're still acting with misericordianism. Sure. The other person who says, oh no, I would definitely, pull the switch and kill the one guy. And you say, why? They say, well, all those 5 people, they have families and they would die and someone might just be injured. It'd be horrible. Now for them,
I gotta look at that other dude on the other track. He looks like a no good guy.
He looks a loser.
kind of want to kill him actually.
He's got like a full leather gimp suit on. We gotta take this guy out.
Oh, wait, this is my kid. This is my people. This is the second person going to do this.
But so for them at that moment, the most clear and present avoidable misery is all the pain and suffering of those people and their families. So both people are operating under the same philosophical ethic.
They just have a different set of scales.
But philosophers say, and I know this because I teach ethical philosophy, but I also was watching a Harvard lecture for philosophy with 300 students in an auditorium. And that was his first example. And what he said was people who pull the lever, believe in utilitarianism, and people who don't pull the lever believe in deontological Kantian categorical imperativism. And those two are contradictory. But what I'm saying is, no, they don't believe in either of those things. They just believe, as everyone, and this is my belief, is that misericordianism is not just a thing you have to adopt. It is the way we are built as human beings. Right. Human beings are little misericordian robots that they scan our brains scan the world for avoidable miseries. And when you are presented with one, you feel panic and urgency to go and fix it. And that's just the way we're wired. That's who we are as human beings.
Kind of like the idea that like everyone's always acting selfishly, and you're like, well, what about people who do altruistic things? They're like, well, because they value that version of themselves, the self who does the charitable, like they're still acting somewhat selfishly where they're like, I'm doing this for me, but
I would even say people don't act selfishly. Not only it doesn't matter if they act selfishly, but people don't act selfishly. They just are, again, they're just trying to eliminate avoidable misery. But the misery that you're most aware of is your own. And therefore, most of the time, you see people taking actions that eliminate their own miseries. But as soon as someone, even a selfish person who's presented with a child drowning in a fountain right in front of them, they're going to jump in and help the child, even if it ruins their $1,000 Italian gimp suit.
Well, that's the... I would never do that. That poor child is in trouble. By the way, how deep is this freaking fountain that the child can't just stand up? I mean...
Not like a little baby.
I think
like
the child's not trying... Who's putting a baby in a fountain? There are other people responsible for this.
Haven't you seen that thing where the babies are climbing? You know,
this dude ran over, tied 5 people to a trolley track, and then came over and pushed a baby into a fountain. We got to get that guy. That's the real problem.
I'm the ethical man. I go around creating ethical dilemmas for people to solve.
I'm like, Jeremy
Get that
Bentham?
man.
Is that,
Oh my
is
God,
that
there
you?
he is.
He's like, I never died. I would run around.
I just steal people's organs and
Three-
put them into my body, and that's how I live forever.
Oh my gosh, we know about him now.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what
so
he
Jeremy
does.
Bentham, the person who lived for 300 years by harvesting organs because he thought it was better for the utilitarian good.
It is for him to live.
This is good. I understand. I think I learned more about history with these talks with you, Adam. It's very helpful. I very much appreciate the worldview that you help inform me on.
Yeah. So I'll say this at the end. I
Yeah.
wrote a whole book on this. It's called The Future of Good.
Okay.
Because when I say it at the beginning, you make it all about like, oh,
The book?
you make it like I'm some kind of fancy, I don't know, expert or something. But I did actually write a whole book on this. So if people think this is interesting and they're kind of, want to learn more,
Yeah.
you can go read it's called The Future of Good. Because
Future of Good.
the premise is, or the title means, I believe this will be what everyone believes in the future is the right thing to do. And we're just at this moment in history where we can't see it because these weird BWE and pinprick arguments have convinced all these idiotic. Well, I mean, they're fine. I shouldn't call them idiots, but they're convinced in their times that this is a wrong
These
idea.
weird like trick arguments are stymieing all the conversation
Exactly.
and all the research and
Yeah.
all the discussion
It's-
on these
Yeah,
potentially fruitful, areas.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why it's called The Future of Good. Is my hope is that we get over this hurdle. People begin to see that the BDE idea is completely wrong just because it's not right logically. And then the same thing, the pinprick argument also just falls apart when you realize what avoidable means.
So people listening, I think what the action that we can leave people with is start looking to see if you can get those eyes that see things through the avoidable misery filter.
Well,
And you're like, oh, right, I'm seeing this happen. That
just
does
look
check
around.
out.
Just look around. Yeah.
And then also, if you're interested in this, Adam's got a great book.
You can read the book. You can
Future
read
of
the book.
Good by
and
Adam
you can
Braus
also disagree
on
I-
Amazon.
I'll,
How do you disagree with the book?
Well, you can just message me. You can just tell me you're wrong and explain why. I would love that because again, I'm interested in being proven wrong. Like I want to, what do they call it? Strangle my darlings, murder your darlings.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sorry. Is that
No, I have heard that.
creepy?
I
What
was,
is that?
I was trying to think of like
That's what
how to-
creatives do, right?
I just
Creatives,
left you hanging there.
and scientists,
Yeah,
right?
they say
yeah. You can't just hold. You can't have like a golden calf, a golden cow that you like. Oh, this is right. You have to be like, give me the absolute. I'm always looking for the absolute strongest argument against it. I'm always looking for that because I can't find it, and I've been trying really hard. I mean, I'm a devil's advocate
Yeah.
through and through. Like people say something, I'm like, how is that wrong? And the same thing, I'm like, how is this wrong? How could it be wrong? And I just can't find an example where it doesn't, maybe it doesn't, again, it doesn't always lead to a clear answer. But what it does is it explains why a situation is muddled.
Mhm.
It explains why people don't know if it's good to drop the atomic bomb or not. That is a great example. You don't know not because there are competing ethical philosophies,
Mhm.
but because in that circumstance, you can't actually know which will lead to less avoidable misery.
Yeah.
And so your brain is like, I don't know. And so it becomes this sort of toss up and people grasp at straws to kind of figure out a way to decide because you need to make a decision. And then history goes one way or the other, or your own personal life goes one way or the other.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes it's not about changing the actual things that are happening. It's about changing the way you perceive them. I mean, when they're like, the earth gets cold half of the year because we've angered the gods who are like punishing us. And then we sacrifice goats and then it gets warmer, 6 months later. And you're like, okay, good. And you're like, no, that is those things are happening, but you're completely off on your understanding of why they're happening. And when you get when you
right.
dive down and understand the mechanisms, you're able to operate better. You're able to operate not on these completely false architectures that you've created to explain something that's not happening that way at all.
So the giant purple man doesn't take the sun away for 6 months of
Look,
the year?
all I'm saying is if he has the stones that let him do anything and he's like, there's not enough resources in the universe, instead of killing half the universe, just double the resources,
Oh
right?
my God, you're
Come
so
on.
right.
Come on,
What the
Thanos,
hell?
big brain. Think it. It made more sense in the comics because
That's
he was in love
funny.
with the concept of Death, who's a lady in Marvel Universe, and he's like trying to please her by killing a lot of people. But that didn't happen in the movies.
Ooh.
In the movies,
They
there's
should
that
have
plot
done that in
hole.
the movie.
I don't know.
That would have been cool. Thanos.
Some stuff doesn't translate.
Thanos
super
means
perfectly.
death in ancient Greek.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why the Athanatoi were the gods, the deathless.
That's beyond me.
You didn't know Thanos meant death?
Well, I didn't know
It's his whole name.
Athanatoi. I haven't heard of
Well,
that.
yeah, Athanatos.
I mean, I'd be surprised if he was named after anything Greek because he's actually an alien from another planet. So they probably don't have our. Yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
Unless the ancient Greek civilization was just planted into our history from aliens
So then
in
how
order
come
to
he's the only
explain.
purple shriveled chin dude?
His chin is quite weird, isn't it?
It's weird. All right. Stay tuned for our giant Marvel Universe podcast that's spinning off of this.
Really
We're-
go MCU.
I think that
hard.
the crossover of the people who want to hear about people who want to hear about philosophy and the different machinations of Jeremy Bentham and who want to hear about Thanos.
Pretty fat.
This is the one spot you're going to hear.
This is it. This
Right.
is it. It's the Scott Adam vortex. Well, cool. Should we wrap up? This is kind of a long
think
episode,
so.
but it was a big solution, a
It's a
big
big-
idea,
it's a big
covered a
idea.
lot of history and land and I mean, you got to bring a lot of BWE energy if you want to.
No, big world Ender energy is not what you want. If somebody walks into the party, you're like, that dude's going to end the world.
my
That's
God.
not a good.
He gets all the ladies.
Does he?
Well, it's the end of the world. Grab.
Yeah, but you're causing
Grab the one you love. Be with the one you love. All right,
We'll have
Scott.
to try that out.
This has been great. Thanks for being a gentleman, a scholar.
As
Bringing your
always,
skepticism,
thank you as well,
your
gentleman and
generosity.
scholar. Likewise.
Thank
And
see
thank
you
you
all
guys
next
for
time.
listening.
Take care.
We'll see you next week.
Bye. Hey there. Thanks for listening to that episode of Solutions from the Multiverse.
Yeah, we're back with a little after roll. Hello.
Hey, after roll. Roll that after roll. So basically, we want you to subscribe
Yeah.
and rate and review and tell someone, like, take your favorite solution and send it to someone who you think it would like blow their mind to hear it.
Yeah, we love making the show. We're proud of it. And we're excited. We want other people to show. We know that the main way people find podcasts is word of mouth. I know that's true for me. I listen to my friends who also listen to podcasts tell me about ones, and I go, okay, I'm cluing into that. So we want to be part of that chain.
So thanks for being a part of Solutions.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again real soon.
Bye.
Bye.